"Name yourself," the man at the front of that hall said, "or step aside, and let a woman who understands what is at stake take your place." 400 people, and every one of them knew that if I said my own name out loud in that room, a border might go to war by autumn. That is what they had told me. That is what I had believed for 6 days. That one muddy ferrywoman's answer stood between the north and a season of graves, and that the decent thing, the humble thing, the thing a girl like me was raised to do, was to stand aside and let the arrangement close over me like water. I had believed it right up until the morning I finally asked the one question nobody had wanted me to ask. I looked at the king, who had not looked away from me in 6 days. Then I said my name. 11 weeks earlier, I had been up to my waist in the spring melt with a drowning child in my arms, and I had not even known the king was there. My name is Freya, and I keep the ford at Rushford, which is not a trade anyone chooses, and is a trade somebody has to do. Rushford is a village on the Rush, which is a river that is nothing at all for 9 months of the year and a killer for the other 3, and where the road crosses it there is a ford, and at the ford there is my family. My mother kept it, and her father before her. We know the water. We know which stones move in the melt and which hold, and where the current lies about its own depth. And we take the carts across in the bad months for a copper each, and we pull people out of it for nothing, which is the actual job. I was 25 that spring. An Omega, unbonded, no house, a ferrywoman is not a person anyone dresses their daughters to become. And I had pulled 9 people out of that river in my life, and lost 2, and I remembered the 2. Now, the procession. Word had come 6 weeks ahead, the way it does, and it had turned Rushford inside out. King Sigurd of Frostmere was making a progress through the river villages, a choosing, they said, a lunar tour. The king going village to village to look upon the unbonded daughters of the north and choose, freely, in the old way. I need to explain the old way, because the whole of this turns on it, and nobody outside the north understands it. In Frostmere a lunar cannot be arranged. It is the oldest law we have, older than the crown. A king's mate must be named, spoken aloud, by him, in front of witnesses, freely, and the naming is binding the moment it is heard, and it voids any prior claim or contract on either of them, and the woman named may refuse. Once, in the same breath, and if she refuses he is free, and so is she. That is the law. A spoken thing, witnessed, that cannot be unspoken. It exists so that no king of Frostmere can ever be sold into a bond or sell himself out of one, and it had held for 400 years, and hold on to it, because everybody in this story is either using it or being used by it, and it took me far too long to work out which I was. So the whole province spent 6 weeks sewing. Every girl in every river village had a gown and a gift and a place in a line, and their mothers drilled them, and Rushford was no different, and I was, I want to be clear, not in any of it. Nobody expects the ferrywoman to stand in the line. I had a river to mind. The melt was high that year. They rode in on a Tuesday at about noon, and I missed the entire thing. Because at about noon, the miller's boy went into the rush. His name was Nils, and he was 6, and he had been told 900 times to keep off the stones in the melt, and he was on the stones in the melt because there was a procession coming, and every adult who would normally have hauled him off them by his collar was lining a road in their good clothes. I did not see him go in. I heard it, you learn the sound, the particular wrong splash, and I was in the water before I had finished thinking, because that is the whole of what my body is trained to do. I will not make it dramatic. It was fast, and it was cold, and it was arithmetic. The rush in melt does not carry you down, it carries you under, into the undercut where the bank has been eaten out. And a 6-year-old goes there in about 4 seconds, and I knew exactly where the undercut was, because I have known where the undercut was my whole life, and I went to where the river was already taking him, instead of chasing where he'd gone in. You do not fight the rush. That is the first thing my mother ever taught me. You cannot outpull it, and you cannot outswim it. You go where it is already going, and you get there first, and you wait for it to bring you what it has taken. I got Nils on the second grab. I got us both onto the shingle. I knelt on that bank in the freezing mud and turned a 6-year-old over and pushed the river out of him until he coughed it up and screamed, which is the best sound in the world, and I sat back in the mud with my heart going and a child howling against me, soaked to the bone and shaking and not caring even slightly. And then I noticed it had gone quiet. I looked up. There was a man on a horse about 40 feet away, at the head of a column that filled the whole road, and the entire procession of the King of Frostmere had stopped dead in the road to watch a ferry woman kneel in the mud with a coughing child, and the man on the horse was looking at me with an expression I did not have a word for, and had not moved. And by the way the people around him were shifting, had not moved for some time. I did what you do. I got Nils up and got him to his mother, who had come screaming down the bank, and I stood there dripping and filthy in front of 400 people in their good clothes, and I wanted very badly to be back in the river, which is the only place I have ever known exactly what I was doing. I did not curtsy. It did not occur to me. I was covered in mud and a child had nearly died, and my hands were shaking too hard to have managed it anyway. And the King of Frostmere, without taking his eyes off me, said to the man beside him, "Tell me her name." I found out what that meant 6 weeks later. At the time, I thought a great man had been struck by a rescue. The way great men are sometimes struck by small, brave things, and that it would pass, and I went home and got out of my wet clothes and thought no more about it. It did not pass. Arn came to the ford the next morning, the king's second, a big, quiet man who stood at the top of my bank and looked at the water like a man who did not trust it, which showed sense. He said the king wished to speak with me. I said I had carts to take across. He said he would wait, and he did, for 3 hours, and helped me haul a stuck wheel out of the shallows in his good coat while he waited, which is when I decided I liked him. The king came to the ford himself in the end. That is the part nobody believes. He did not summon me to wherever the Progress was lodging. He came down to the river. And he stopped at the top of the bank exactly where Arn had, and he looked at the water, and then he looked at me standing in it to my knees with a pole in my hand. "You went in without stopping," he said. It was not a question. There were 400 people on that road, and every one of them was looking at me. And you went into a river in the melt without looking up once. There was a child in it, Your Grace. I am aware of what was in it. He came down the bank carefully and stood on the shingle where I had knelt the day before. Do you know what everyone else on that road did when the boy went in? No, nothing, said King Sigurd. They looked at me. To see what I would do, 400 people watched a child go under and waited to take their cue from the king, and one woman was already in the water before the rest of us had finished being important at each other. He looked at me. I have been on this Progress for 4 months. I have been looked at by every unbonded woman in the north, in a line, in a gown, waiting to see what I wanted so they could be it, and then a ferry woman didn't look up. I did not have anything to say to that. I have never known what to say to a person who has decided something about me. He came back to the ford. Again, and again, through the rest of that week and into the next, while the Progress sat lodged at Rushford and did not move on, which I did not understand and which was, I found out later, causing a very great deal of trouble. He was not good company at first. He was a king, he had spent 4 months being performed at, and he had forgotten how to simply be beside a person. But he learned, and by the second week he had stopped standing at the top of the bank and started sitting on the shingle at the low water, out of the wind, where I could talk to him while I minded the crossing. And he asked me about the river. Real questions. Where the undercut was and why. How I knew which stones held. What it was like to lose the 2 I lost. Nobody had ever asked me about the river, as though it were a thing worth knowing rather than a thing beneath knowing, and a king sat on my shingle and asked me the second question, and then the third, and I have never entirely recovered from it. His wolf came in the 5th week and disgraced him immediately. An enormous grey animal came down my bank at dawn, waded straight into the shallows of a river in Melt, which no sane creature does, and stood there looking enormously pleased with himself while the current tried to take his legs out, and then came and lay down on my shingle, soaking wet, and put his head on my foot. "He is not to go in the water," Sigurd said, appalled Arn. "Tell me he did not just go in the water." "He went in the water, your grace," said Arn, with the flat satisfaction of a man who has stopped hoping. The children of Rushford adored him within a day. Nils, once he recovered, would come down and sit with him for hours. The wolf let a 6-year-old who had nearly drowned sit against him at the edge of the water that had nearly taken him, and I have thought since that the animal knew exactly what he was doing, because Sigurd certainly did not. I asked him, in that 5th week, why the progress had stopped. I had worked up to it for days, because I am not a woman who asks great men their business, and because I had begun to be frightened of the answer. 4 months of a lunar tour, village after village, and it had halted dead at a river crossing for over a month, and a progress that does not stop for nothing. "You know why," he said. "I'd rather you said it." "I've been guessing, and my guesses are all mad, and one of them has me being taken up for wasting the crown's time." That got something out of him that was almost a laugh. Then it went, and he looked at the water for a while. "Because if it moves on," he said, "I have to be at the end of it. And at the end of it there is a thing I have to do that I have not been able to make myself do, and every day the progress sits here at your ford is a day I do not have to do it. And I am aware that is not a reason a king is allowed to give, and I have given it to you anyway." "What thing?" "I can't tell you yet." His jaw moved. "I want to. I have wanted to for 3 weeks, and every time I nearly do, I understand that the moment I tell you, you will start deciding what to make of it instead of what to make of me. And I have had 4 months of people deciding what to make of my crown. I would like a few more mornings on a riverbank first. That is selfish, and I know it, and I am doing it anyway." I did not press him. "I have found that a person tells you the true thing faster if you let the current bring it, rather than reaching for it. But I went home that night and lay awake, because a king had told me that there was a thing at the end of his own progress that he could not bear to do, and that a ford in the middle of nowhere was the only place in the north he was allowed to not do it, and I did not have the first idea what could frighten a man like that, and I had begun, without deciding to want very badly to be a place a person like that was allowed to stop. I did not know yet what my name was worth, or why a king had stopped a 4-month progress, dead at a river crossing, and would not move it on. If you want to find out what a spoken word can void, and what a woman does when she learns that her own yes might cost a province a war, stay with me. What I found out at the end of 6 weeks turned the whole of it inside out, and I very nearly gave up the one thing that was ever mine to give. Lady Catherine found me at the ford in the 6th week, and I want to tell it carefully, because everyone gets her wrong. She came down to the river alone, in a dress worth more than my house, and she was beautiful and cold and precise. And she was the last person I expected, and the first person to tell me the truth. "You don't know, do you?" she said. "You genuinely do not know what you are standing in the middle of. I can see it on you." She looked at the water. "I am Catherine of Dramar. I am the reason for this progress, and I am the woman the King of Frostmere is meant to name at the end of it, and until a fairy woman climbed out of a river, I was going to be." I did not say anything. She was clearly not finished. "There is no free choosing," Catherine said. "There was never going to be a free choosing. My father's house holds the Eastern Marches, and the Marches have been at the edge of war with Frostmere for 3 years, and the price of peace was a marriage, me to your king. But Frostmere law does not allow an arranged lunar. So the crown built a fiction, a progress, a choosing tour, village to village, and at the end of it, at the last stop, the king would freely name the one high-born woman who had happened to travel the whole way with him. Her mouth was thin. Me. It was going to be me. And it was going to be called love, and 400 years of your beautiful old law was going to be used to launder a treaty neither of us agreed to. Then why are you telling me? Because he stopped the progress at a river, Catherine said, and he has not looked at me in 6 weeks, and I have watched a king who was going to say my name out of duty forget I exist, because a woman went into the water without checking whether he was watching. She looked at me, and there was nothing warm in it, and nothing false either. I do not want him. I want that understood. I have never wanted him. But I am not a fool, and I know what it means that he wants you, and I have come to tell you what it costs before someone who does want the arrangement tells you a shaped version of it. What does it cost? If he names you, Catherine said, the treaty voids. My father takes it as the insult it is, and the Marches go to war with Frostmere by the autumn. Because a border that was bought with a marriage does not stay bought when the marriage is thrown over for a ferry woman. She stood. That is the price of your name, Freya of Rushford. A great many people will die on a border you have never seen, so that a king can have the one thing he chose for himself. I thought you should hear it from the woman it also ruins, rather than from the men who arranged it. And then she went back up the bank, and left me standing in the river holding the whole of it, and I want to tell you that I was noble about it, and I was not. Something in me went very still and very clear. For 25 years I had gone where the water was going. That is not a figure of speech for me. It is the actual trade, the actual philosophy, the thing my mother put into me before I could read. You do not fight a current bigger than you. You find where it is already headed, and you make your peace with it. It had kept me alive in a river that killed my grandfather. It had made me good at the one thing I was good at, and it had also, I understood standing there in the cold with Catherine's news in my hands, made me a woman who would give up the only thing she had ever wanted the instant somebody powerful told her the current was too big. I was going to refuse him. I decided it that same night, on the shingle, alone, in the dark. Because the law let me, the named woman may refuse. Once, in the same breath, and a refusal would set him free and set Catherine free and hold the border and cost nobody anything except a ferry woman who had never expected anything in the first place. It was the humble thing and the decent thing and the thing I was raised to do, which is to go where the water is already going and not fight a current bigger than me. I told Sigurd, the next morning, that when he named me, I would refuse. I have never seen a man go so still. Say that again. Catherine told me what it costs. The treaty, the border, the war. My voice was steadier than I felt. I'm a ferry woman, Your Grace. I've spent my whole life learning not to fight the river. You don't win against a thing that big. You go where it's already going. And this is bigger than me, and I am not going to be the reason a border burns. And so when you name me, I'll refuse, and you'll be free to do the thing that keeps the peace. And that's the end of it. He looked at me for a long moment, and then he did not argue, which frightened me more than arguing would have. You'd do that, he said. I'd do that. You would stand in front of the whole court and refuse the one thing you want, to hold a peace that isn't yours to hold, because you have decided you are too small to be worth a war. He said it very quietly. Freya, has it occurred to you to check whether the river is actually going where they've told you it's going? I did not understand him. Not for 4 more days. I understood him because of the carts. That is genuinely how. I keep the ford, and I keep count of what crosses it, because the crossing tolls are how I eat, and I had been watching the Eastern Road for 6 weeks, and there had been no trade off the marches. None, not one dromar cart, not one marches drover, in 6 weeks, on the only road that connects them to us. In the season when that road is busiest, you do not stop trading with a territory you are about to marry into. You trade more. You send goods ahead of the wedding. Unless there is not going to be a wedding, and there was never going to be, because the thing that road actually carries had already stopped. I sat down on my own shingle and went cold all over, and it was not the water. I did not go to the king. I went to Catherine, and I asked her one question, the question nobody had wanted me to ask, which was, when did your father last send anything down the Eastern Road? And Lady Catherine of Dromar looked at me, and I watched her do the same arithmetic I had done, and I watched her face change. In the winter, she said slowly. He recalled the March's trade in the winter. He told me it was the roads. She sat down, which a woman like that does not do. The treaty was signed in the spring. He recalled the trade before the treaty was signed. Here is what had actually happened, and it took the two of us and Arne most of a night to lay it out. The treaty was dead. It had been dead before it was ever signed. Catherine's father, the Lord of Dromar, had already made his peace elsewhere. A quieter, better bargain with a territory further east, sealed in the winter, which was why he had pulled his trade off the Frostmere road before spring. The marriage to Sigurd was worthless to him. He had signed it anyway, and let it go forward, for one reason, because a betrothal in progress is a thing you can hold over a king. As long as Frostmere believed the peace hung on the wedding, Frostmere would give Dromar anything to keep the wedding on the rails, grain, gold, the border tolls, the garrison at the eastern crossing quietly stood down. There was no war waiting behind my refusal. There was a bill. Dromar was being paid every month in the coin of a peace that had already been bought and paid for somewhere else, and the only thing keeping the payments coming was a fiction that the border would burn if the marriage fell through. And the man collecting on Frostmere's side, the man who had built the choosing tour, who had drafted the fiction, who had ridden 6 weeks at the head of that progress, steering a king toward a bride whose father had already sold him out, was Lord Merrow, the Chancellor. The master of the progress, who had a great deal of Dromar's quiet gratitude in accounts that did not have his name on them. Catherine had not known. That is the part I hold on to. She had been sold twice, once by her father to Frostmere, and once by her father's real bargain to keep her in the dark so she would play her part convincingly. She was the most deceived person in the whole affair, and she was the one they were all counting on to be too proud to check. Merrow moved the moment he understood that I had. He called the choosing to its close. The final stop, the last village, the great gathering where the king would name his Luna in front of the assembled north, and he brought it forward by a fortnight. Before I could get anything I knew in front of anyone who mattered, and he arranged it so that the naming would happen in the hall at Rushford, with the whole progress as witness, because he was certain of two things, that the king would name me and that I would refuse. He had heard about the refusal. Of course he had, and a refusal was better for him than a compliant bride. A refusal freed the king straight back into the arrangement, on the record, witnessed, with a ferrywoman's own humility as the seal on it. He was not afraid of my no. He was counting on it. That is how I came to be standing in that hall, covered, for once, in something other than mud, with 400 people watching, and the King of Frostmere looking at me the way he had looked at me for 6 weeks, and Lord Merrow at the front saying, "Name yourself, or step aside, and let a woman who understands what is at stake take your place." He meant it as mercy. That is the craft of a man like Merrow. He gave me the noble exit in front of everybody, step aside, hold the peace, be the good small woman, and he was so certain I would take it that I watched him relax when I opened my mouth. I did not step aside. Before I answer, I said, "To the hall." Not to him. I keep the ford at Rushford, and I keep the tolls, and I keep count of what crosses. And I would like to ask Lord Merrow, in front of everyone, why the Eastern Road has carried no Dromar trade since the winter, since before the treaty this whole progress is built to honour was ever signed. The hall did not understand. But Merrow did, and I watched a man who had steered a king for 6 weeks go the colour of the river in flood. "You do not stop trading with a house you are about to marry," I said. Unless the marriage was never worth anything to them, and it wasn't, and Lord Merrow knows it wasn't, and Lady Catherine's father has been paid twice for a piece he already sold, once by the East and once by this crown, every month, for keeping a wedding on the rails that everyone at the top of this progress knows is a corpse. I turned to Sigurd. There is no war behind my name, Your Grace. There never was. That was the lie that was going to make me refuse you, and it very nearly worked, because I have spent my whole life being told not to fight a current bigger than me. But this current was going the other way the entire time, and I finally went and checked. It came apart the way these things come apart, not in a clean moment, but in a slow horror spreading through a room, as 400 people did arithmetic they had never been invited to do. Catherine stood up and confirmed the winter recall of the trade, in her own voice, as the Lord of Dromar's own daughter, which no one could gainsay. Arn had the toll counts, mine, 6 weeks of an empty Eastern road, in my own hand. And the Crown's own progress accounts, once the King ordered them opened that night, agreed with all of it. Merrow did not confess. Men like him never do. There is no need, because there is no single crime to confess to. He had told no lie that could be pinned. The treaty was signed. The trade recall had an explanation. The payments to Dromar had a purpose on paper. He had simply arranged a set of true things into a shape, and taken the gratitude that shape produced, and steered a king toward a bride to keep the shape standing. It took a year to unpick, and he lost everything to it. In the end, not for treason, but for the slower thing, which is that 400 people had watched a ferrywoman see clearly what he had spent 6 weeks making certain no one looked at. And Sigurd named me. He did it properly, in the old way, in front of the whole assembled North, and before he did, he crossed that hall and stood in front of me and said, "Lo, so the law would still hear it, but I would hear it first. I am going to name you. And you may still refuse, and it will still be free, because there is no war behind it now, and there never was, and I need you to know that before I do, that a refusal costs nothing but me, tonight, and that I would rather be refused by you, honestly, than say anyone else's name for the rest of my life." "You could just name me," I said. "I could." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. "You went into a river without checking whether I was watching. The least I can do is give you the chance to walk out of this hall without checking whether I am." He named me. And I did not refuse. I kissed him first, in that hall, in front of the whole North, still not entirely believing any of it, and it was brief, and it was warm. And it settled something in me that had been braced since I was old enough to understand that a ferrywoman is a thing the world uses and does not keep. The fallout was long. The peace with the Marches had to be built again, properly this time, in the open, without a marriage to launder it, which turned out to be perfectly possible, because the East had been ready to deal for a year, and only Merrow's fiction had kept anyone from noticing. It cost gold, and it cost a hard season of negotiation, and it cost Dromar a great deal of its standing, and not one person died on that border, because there was never going to be a war. There was only ever a bill, and we stopped paying it. Catherine of Dromar did not become my friend, exactly. She became something I value more, which is a person who tells me the truth whether or not I want it. And who was the one who told me the truth at the start when a shaped version would have served her better? She holds the Eastern Crossing now, on Frostmere's behalf, by her own choosing, a woman who was sold twice and now cannot be sold at all. And who is, I am told, terrifying at it. 3 years on, I still keep the ford. I would not give it up, and there was a fight about it, and I won. And there is now a very fine stone crossing being built a mile upriver that will one day make my ford unnecessary, which I approve of entirely. Because the point was never the tolls. The point was that somebody who knows the water should be at the water. I have trained 4 of them now, from 4 villages, and 2 are women, and every one of them can tell you where the undercut is. Nils is 9 and swims like an otter and is forbidden the stones in the melt and goes on the stones in the melt. And I haul him off by his collar exactly as I was hauled, and he will keep the ford after me if he wants it, and I think he wants it. Sigurd's wolf still goes in the river, every spring, in the melt, straight in, against all sense, and stands there letting the current fight his legs with an expression of enormous idiot joy. And Sigurd stands on the bank telling him to come out, and he does not come out, and I have stopped pretending I do not find it the funniest thing in the north. And I still say the thing my mother taught me, most days, to whoever is learning the water: you don't fight the rush. You go where it's already going. I said it to a king once as a reason to give up the only thing I ever wanted. I have learnt since that it was never advice about surrender. It was advice about looking, about finding out where the current is actually going before you decide you cannot beat it. Most of the time, you have simply been told the wrong direction by someone who profits from you not checking. I still wonder about Katrin's father, honestly, more than I wonder about Mero. Mero wanted money and told a shaped truth to get it, and there is no mystery in a man like that. But a father sold his own daughter into a marriage he knew was worthless, and kept her ignorant so she would play her part. And I have met that man since, and he is charming and grieved and entirely certain he did the sensible thing for his house. Tell me in the comments whether you think he ever, once, saw her as anything but a toll to be collected. I have never been able to decide, and she will not talk about it, and I have stopped asking. Comment the ford if you want to hear what Sigurd's wolf did the first time he tried to cross the river, carrying Nils on his back, without asking me first. And if you want more nights like this one, a king steered for 6 weeks toward a lie, a fairy woman who nearly gave up her whole life to hold a peace that was already dead, and one empty road that told the truth when 400 people couldn't. Stay close. There is more of Frostmere left to tell. Where are you listening from tonight? I would love to know.